One APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt.
Welcome back, everyone, to Out in Front with Annette. My name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battle War in Progress, and we are live from Sine Part 1, because I suspect we're having a special session, but we're going to hear from these two fabulous folks if they think we're having a special session. Things are crazy around here. They've been crazy since last night. I know people at home can't see it. I've been getting text messages all night and all day asking, what in the heck are they doing? Are they doing anything at all? If you want to take a look, they're doing a whole bunch of stuff right now, and people are all over kind of hanging out, doing things in the halls. There's conference committees going on. Floors have been going in and out, so there's a lot to do before midnight/1 a.m. because they make their own rules. And so we're going to get the latest and greatest from Steve and April. I'm going to actually introduce April Corbin. She's with the Nevada Current. April, say hi to our guests. Welcome to the show for the first time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right. So, April, tell the viewers just a little bit about yourself. You and I worked together for many years. They know Steve. He's on here all the time. But talk to our viewers about who you are and what you do.
Okay. I'll be loud. I'm the deputy editor of the Nevada Current. We're a nonprofit news organization that covers politics and policy around the state. And it's our 5-year anniversary today. So, yeah.
Yay. All right. So, lots to talk about. Steve. Predictions on special session, predictions on the future. What are we doing? What are we looking like tonight?
Well, first, a special session. Yeah, I didn't think there was going to be one, but now I'm pretty convinced there's going to be one. There's just so many bills. There's not enough time to get everything done in the time that's remaining. We don't know if whatever deal that has been worked out with the governor will hold. We know that the Republicans held tight and voted out the Appropriations Act on party line vote in both Senate and Assembly, and so that does not bode well. But it may be another situation where the governor signed something that his Republican colleagues in the legislature voted against, which will make for yet another awkward bill signing. So
we'll make sure we put the X's and O's where the people voted against it and all of that.
Watch for future photos. And then also in terms of the special session, it'll probably be, historically, they're very short after the regular session. They last for maybe 1 or 2 days, and this one will probably be in that same milieu. I don't know if they're going to get to a couple of the big bills like the film tax credit or the A's stadium. Those might actually be saved for a special session that happens later in the summer. That's the rumor I've heard from a couple of people, and so that could be something as well.
All right, April, what's your take on special session? What's left to do? Where do you think things go from here? I know you and I have worked several sessions together, like me and Steve. What do you think is going to happen tonight? And what do you think about vouchers? Because obviously that's been a big sticking point for the governor and others. But I hear that the Democrats on both sides are holding strong on that, and that's not going to be in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've heard, is that they're drawing a sort of a hard line in the sand and saying that we don't want to fund private schools and private school vouchers. But there is still a lot of wiggle room, right? We still need, with the Appropriations Act, they still have that, but also with the capital improvements thing, that has to pass the Senate with a 2/3 majority. So one Republican has to come with them on that. So even if Lombardo's maybe giving some on because he's gotten concessions in other places like criminal justice and some other school choice things, we might see somebody, the Senate, hold out on that. So there's still a lot of wiggle room and pushing. And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the opportunity scholarships, the funding that it has received in the past sessions, has been bills that have been added at the last second or amendments into that that give it a few more like extra money. So an appropriation of that. So, I mean, I think there's still a lot to watch between now and midnight on
Yeah.
that particular issue.
And we have our team watching those bills, making sure nothing crazy is amended into that. I've been literally here all day. Others have been here all day watching that nothing gets amended into those. But if you're watching at home and you have questions about the process or you have questions about what's still on the table, put it in the chat now. Our experts can ask or answer your questions about process or about bills that are still left out there and bills that have come into play today, which, speaking of, the governor's crime bill now is in play, which is very interesting. We have been hearing rumors all week that one of his lines was on increasing the penalties around strangulation and maybe changing that definition. Today, we saw an amendment on the floor of the Senate out of the Judiciary Committee that changes up the crime bill and adds some additional things in there, changing some definitions, things like that. How do you think that plays into this, Steve? And how do you think that plays into the end deal and the negotiations that are happening?
Yeah, well, the fact is that the Democrats are going to have to give something to Lombardo that he can take away and brag about after the session. At this point, it's a lot of credit and having something to take to your voters and said, look, this is what I campaigned on, this is what I delivered. And that's both Democrats and Republicans. Now, unfortunately for the governor, Democrats campaigned on not increasing opportunity scholarships or doing any other program that may be considered a voucher program. So I don't think he's going to get that. He may get a crime bill because that's something Democrats and Republicans can generally come to an agreement on. We saw Democrats promoting bills that increased fentanyl penalties this time around. So that's probably something they can come to an agreement on. So I think that'll play into the end game.
I am hearing there may be work on the fentanyl bills happening in conference committee right now. So many of our friends from the public defender's office are up in those conference committees watching what happens between the crime bill right now and the fentanyl bill, because there may be some changes happening between those two bills. So that's another thing to watch tonight, but it's super busy. April, what other issues are we still waiting on? Obviously, the capital improvements budget, the appropriations budget. Talk to us about why those budgets are so important to the folks at home and to real Nevadans, because those are the things that essentially fund our government.
Oh yeah, I mean the appropriations act is what, like $7 billion. That it's a lot of money, and if you've seen sort of vague descriptions about what that covers, it's because it encompasses a lot of stuff. I mean, it's huge, and I think that if they don't pass it before the end of the month, it would be very bad for the entire state. So it's you can't underestimate how important that is.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talked about this week is that Medicaid funding, about $2 billion of Medicaid funding is in there. There's rural health clinics in there. UNLV and UNR funding is in there. The medical school bills, highway patrol. I mean, you name it.
It touches everything.
That's in the appropriations bill. But what about capital improvements? We saw them in 2017 mess with the capital improvements, and that's when Roberson had a temper tantrum and we had to follow him over to the governor's office. So do you think there's going to be any shenanigans around that?
I don't know. I haven't heard a whole lot about that. I think it seems like a lot of energy is focused elsewhere on things, but that doesn't mean it's not happening behind closed doors. Unfortunately, most of what happens in this building happens behind closed doors. It's a very untransparent process. So I wish I had more insider.
That's why we just share, right?
But you never know. You never know. There's always surprises and always surprise bills that happen. I mean, a few days ago, nobody knew that few people knew that the legislation was going to be introduced to do a $100 million homelessness project grant thing that kind of was thrown at us last minute overnight, and saw a hearing and is making its way through already. So, there's plenty.
So that's an interesting bill I want to ask you about. And then, Steve, I'm going to come back to you on Senate Bill 400 or Assembly Bill 400. So the Senate Bill 528, I believe it was, or Assembly Bill 528. It's hard to keep track of.
It's 528, yeah.
Yeah, it's 528. That bill was introduced the other day. We've heard some rumors floating around about it for a while now, but we hadn't actually seen the bill text. What does that bill actually do, and why is it important? But also, it's important to note who manages that bill, because I've never seen anything quite like it.
Yeah, so the bill essentially creates a matching fund that will help fund homelessness facilities, basically. And the idea is that The Nevada Resorts Association and the gaming industry wants to fund a sort of homeless campus, you could call it. There's one in San Antonio that they're modeling off of this. It's like a 20-acre campus where people can go and get services. It's got emergency shelters, and then also you can get sort of, programming and things like that. So that's what the bill essentially does. But there's a lot of concern, I think, rumbling around about it becoming sort of just the Resort Association and casinos just wanting to get all of the vagrant homeless people on the strip off the strip and out of their sites and put them all in someplace else. So, I think that's a concern that people are watching, but it happens so quickly and it's moving through so quickly that there hasn't been sort of a full debate on it. And all we saw in the hearing the other day was basically the who's who's of all lobbyists saying what a great idea it was and how they're behind it.
One of the things, and I'm still here, there's just not a lot of space right now. One of the things that I heard that I'm a little concerned about, is we've seen problems with homelessness for our governments and the way they deal with homelessness or houselessness. We saw City of Las Vegas during, Oscar Goodman's reign, essentially pack them up and put them on buses and send them to, San Francisco or Salt Lake City or what have you. We've seen them criminalize homelessness. We've seen them do a lot of those things. We also saw what they did in Reno with the CARE campus. And I get a little suspicious when I start seeing businesses want to pony up for things like taking care of our homeless instead of, figuring out our mental health system or figuring out services for folks. Talk to me about maybe some of the concerns and some of the things that we need to watch for if this gets passed during the implementation, because I think those details are going to be critical.
Yeah. So one of the things to watch is that if this bill passes, and I think a lot of us are assuming that it will, is that you'll hear the number of a $200 million fund, which is $100 million of state dollars and then $100 million from essentially what's probably going to be the gaming industry donating this money. But all of that money is going towards construction and building of a campus and not necessarily boosting the programming and things that would actually help people get out of homelessness, right? So that's something to watch. And the other thing to really watch is that you can get people off the streets, but if you have no place to put them permanently, then what are you doing other than putting them in, a homeless encampment, right? Like a fancy one that we put neon lights around, right? So like we have to watch and see, and you're seeing different bills out throughout the legislature. We have to look at the end of this, like how much money was invested in the actual programming and the actual building of affordable housing and those kinds of things, because the bill 528, which is going to get a lot of attention if it passes, does not address those things because we need more affordable homes and, where things land with like issues like rent control and the building of affordable houses, those things. If we don't have those things, then the nicest homeless camp in the world doesn't do anything. And I think that's something we need to be watching, but that's spread out across a lot of bills.
Yeah.
So,
And that's also, I think, we're probably we're talking about step 4 of the process.
Yes.
Step 2 or step 1 would be, properly assessing why people are homeless. And it's not the same for everybody. There's some mental illness, there's some drug addiction, there's some people who are just living paycheck to paycheck who lost their job and need a home. And you have to deal with each of those groups differently. And there isn't really that kind of intelligent design behind it. As recently as just a couple of months ago, Mayor Carolyn Goodman, Annette mentioned Oscar Goodman, he once had an idea to use the Gene Prison as housing for the homeless. And Mayor Carolyn Goodman repeated that idea and was upset that wasn't going to go forward. But the housing element, you're absolutely right. The affordable housing element, transitional housing, it's a continuum and a process. And very few people have kind of taken that holistic approach for the triage and the assessment at first, and then moving forward to this. Certainly, this is something that's needed. But let's be completely honest. The massive support from the gaming industry has a little bit to do with not wanting homeless people on the strip or by the new stadium, if the new stadium is to be built, anywhere around them to make tourists not want to come. That's why they're investing this money.
And we felt the same way. That's actually why we didn't weigh in on that bill, because we felt like they were just going to round homeless people up and send them away. And that's not how we should be dealing with that issue. So, yeah. Okay. Steve, I want to come back to you. 400 is moving now. That is the bill we were all watching for because we believe that's part of the kind of end game strategy to actually get us out of here. That was heavily amended. All of the school choice voucher money was taken out of that. We're very happy about that. We see that as a huge victory so far. Like I said earlier, we're watching very closely that it doesn't get added to any other bills. Talk to us about what is in 400 now and some of the compromises we were able to get to by funding specifically public school charters and public school transportation for those charters and some of the other things like Read by 3, that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That the Read by 3 funding is very important because there is now restored. Lombardo has pushed for the restoration of the holdback requirement. If you can't read by grade 3, you don't advance to grade 4. You have to be held back until you can read at grade level. That was something the Republicans put in 2015. The Democrats took that out mostly, but kept most of the funding. So that was one change. The charter school transportation, I think, is one of the things that Lombardo is going to tout as one of his successes in this whole thing. But the thing that he really wants was the thing the Democrats, and I think almost universally, I don't know of any dissenters on this, almost universally hated, which is opportunity scholarships or anything that would funnel money from public education to private schools. Lombardo pushed hard for this. He did an event at a Christian school in Las Vegas, was very adamant about it, but that does not look like it's going to happen. That does not look like it's going to be part of the end game. And I don't think the governor is going to, again, veto this budget just because that is not in there. There's enough in there with that crime bill, with other bills, that I think he has enough to take away from this session and said, I got a lot of the things that I wanted, not everything, but we'll come back and try again. And I'm sure the Democrats will come back and try to defeat that again, because vouchers, for good or ill, that is something Democrats have drawn a hard line in the sand, and they have shown absolutely no sign of wavering on that whatsoever. So I think that's a done deal, and I don't think that is going to be part of any kind of negotiation or any deal.
Yeah, and for us personally, that's a huge victory for us. We've been saying that for some time now, that we didn't want any kind of voucher scheme. That was one of those lines in the sand we drew early on before session started, that we were not going to be good with that. And I think the speaker and the majority leader did a really good job of holding the line. We're still obviously going to be checking everything just to be on the safe side, but
and it's easy for them to hold the line when they don't have, they wouldn't have the votes to do it.
Yep.
Even if they were inclined to throw him a bone and give him some money for that, they can't find the votes to do it. They wouldn't get to the majority that they would need to do that, even with all the Republicans on their side. Well, maybe in the Senate, but definitely not in the Assembly. So that's a dead issue.
Yep. The other thing I wanted to talk to you both a little about is voting rights. That was another one of the hard lines we had in the sand coming in. We saw lots of bills from the governor and from the Republican caucuses around voter ID, rolling back vote by mail, rolling back same-day voter registration, all kinds of cockamamie nonsense that the Republicans tried to put forward, including the governor. We've seen absolutely no movement on that. In fact, we've seen us move forward on some of the democracy issues, despite the governor saying that was one of his priorities. And I think, again, the speaker and the majority leader really held the line on that issue. Why do you think that is? And what do you think is so important about them holding that line?
I think it's, I met with the governor before the session started. Actually at the very beginning of the session, we talked about voting rights. And one of the things I told him was that I don't think the Democrats are inclined to give up 1 inch of the territory that they have fought for over the past 20 years, expanding. Nevada is one of the states that has the most expansive ability to vote. It's as easy to vote in this state as it can ever be. A ballot comes to your house automatically. You can register, and you are registered at the DMV whenever you have a transaction, whenever you change your address. I don't think there's anything that the Democrats could do to make it more easy to vote in the state of Nevada. And there was no way that after having fought these battles during administrations of Republicans and Democrats together, that they were going to roll back 1 inch of one of those things. So I posited the idea to the governor that perhaps you would have to build on that, not retrench that. Obviously, the governor had a different point of view, and wanted to do a number of things like voter ID, like ending universal mail balloting. Those were non-starters in the beginning.
Yep.
Democrats said they were non-starters in the beginning. And there really is no good reason to do that. The goal should be to make sure that every eligible voter registers, turns out, and casts a ballot on election day. And in the state of Nevada, it couldn't be easier to do that. So that's one of the things about Nevada that I think it's as easy as it is anywhere in the country to do that. That's something to be proud of.
It's also worth noting that even though there is a very vocal part of the Republican Party that talks about sort of these anti-voting issues, that when you look at the electorate and the everyday people, Republicans use all of those things to the full extent that Democrats do too. They use early voting. They use mail-in ballots. They do same-day registration. Like, all of those things don't just benefit Democrats.
Just not as effectively.
Yeah. So, like, it's not... those are wildly popular.
They actually use it more than Democrats. Same-day voter registration, Republicans use that more than Democrats.
It was favored. So yeah, so it's always worth noting when we talk about this that conversation as a policy is very much rooted in a segment of the GOP and like the primary GOP voters and stuff, rather than the electorate at large. Most Nevadans love this.
Why would you?
They love the access.
You know, and they don't like, for example, ballot harvesting, where people unrelated to the voter pick up ballots and take them in.
Except for when Donald Trump has his own ballot collection events in Arizona.
But I think they've realized, I think the smart Republicans have realized this has to happen. We have to take advantage of these things, because why would you unilaterally disarm and not take advantage of every single method of voting to turn out all of your voters? You're putting yourself at a competitive disadvantage, and you're losing elections as a result.
April, I want to talk about some of the good pieces of legislation around voting rights, and Steve, chime in here too. Those are the Senate bills. Apparently the Senate might be going back in shortly on the Senate floor. There's a lot being done around proactive pieces of legislation around voting rights as well. There's some really good bills that he's vetoed, but there's still a lot of really good bills left, like in jail voting and some of this other stuff that we're still working to get through right now. And there's actually 2 in jail voting bills that we're trying to figure out where it's going to go.
Yeah.
Talk to us about why it's important to still push those bills despite having a Republican governor who has kind of spouted this rhetoric.
Well, the immediate thing is that some of these bills are not really, like the jail voting one is something that like Metro and people have said, we actually would like this because we want to do that, or we have programs in place and this would just help us do that. So they're like really not controversial, except if you look through the lens of like, you can't do any election bills, you know what I mean? Like, so they're sort of popular in general. And also, I mean, it's important to just push for things, even if there is no sense that it might get vetoed, right? Like you just said, you can't give up before, you try. I feel like that's sort of a thing, a mantra that the Democrats have had to do this session, where we need to push things. But also there's the sense that, any bills that they do pass, if they are vetoed at this point, they'll come back to the legislature and maybe the makeup will be different. Maybe there's an election that can swing the supermajority towards the Democrats in the Senate, because they're only one away now. And there's a few vulnerable senators that are going to be up the next election cycle. So they could always get that 2/3 and then override it and sort of render the governor, ineffective at that. So there's a lot of chances forward where it makes sense to keep pushing your policy, even if it may not lead to an immediate law right now.
So we're going to get to audience questions in just a few minutes. So keep them coming in. I see a bunch in the chat. We will get to your questions in a second. There are no dumb questions. So bring them in. I want to answer them. Steve and April will answer them too before we go on the Senate floor. All right, Steve, I want to talk about other bills that are kind of lingering out there. And, we've got a hard deadline tonight. The only constitutional deadlines we have are the start of session and the end of session, and 120 calendar days in between. Today is day 120. They have to sine die technically at midnight, but really they can push it to 1 o'clock.
No, they cannot push it to 1 o'clock.
They can't do it anymore.
1 o'clock. There was a ruling in 2001 that said they could. But the Constitution was later amended to say midnight Pacific time.
Well, there you go, learning with Steve.
So the deadline is in fact midnight Pacific time, which comes at approximately 6.5 hours from right now.
Okay, so it does have to be midnight. They changed the rule. Things move fast around here. What is still hanging out there that you think is super important that needs to be dealt with? Also, just to follow up on that, we know that stadium is still lingering out there. You said that, and I've heard that the deal is falling apart, actually. You've heard that there may be another special down the road for that. I'm hearing film tax credit is completely dead now because it's too expensive. What are you hearing, and what's left out there?
Yeah, those are the two things. I mean, the only constitutional things that have to pass are the budget bills. That's the Appropriations Act, which was just passed by the legislature again, and
that's gone through the full process now and is sent back to the governor.
I believe yes. After just a brief stop in the Senate for signatures, it's on the way to the governor. And then the Capital Improvements Project, which, as you noted earlier, needs 2/3 votes to pass. I think they'll get both of those things. So those are the only constitutional measures. Everything else can die. Everything else that we've been talking about can die, except for those two budget bills. You know, I've been around. I've been around a long time, and I'm cynical enough to think that maybe they introduced the film tax credits to make the stadium look cheap by comparison, and then sort of get that one in there. But that's not true. They've been working on the stadium for quite a long time as well. Though both of those are very heavy lifts. You know, they have done everything to sweeten that stadium deal, except for offer to name it after a net.
Don't do that.
but it's a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift. You know, people have seen Tesla. They have seen the Raiders Stadium. They've seen the Henderson Dollar Loan Center, the Raiders headquarters in Henderson. They've seen these giveaways to Apple and other companies. Faraday Future attempted giveaway, and I think people are sick of it. I think people are struggling, and when they see these large amounts of money being talked about, given to organizations that are wealthy enough to afford to build these things without assistance, they get very cynical about it. And I think lawmakers have heard that, which is one argument against a special session down the road, because you're going to go home and you're going to hear from constituents all summer long. Don't you dare go back up to Carson City and vote for this. So
would then the stadium cost money? A special session costs money too. That also costs the taxpayers money.
Yeah, about the last time I checked, that was about $150,000 for the first day, and about $50,000 every subsequent.
Yeah, because you got to bring the staff back in.
Right, all of those things and whatnot. So those things I think are very heavy lifts. Not easy at all. To get either one of those in. And then there's a lot of the policy bills that are still out there. The jail voting you mentioned, all of these other ones that are still out there. So I even wrote most of them down on a list. Of course, I can't remember most of them now, but the only ones that really have to pass the budget. That's pretty much it. You could do that and go home, and that would be all you need to do.
April, same question for you. What are you watching that's left? And also your feelings on stadium and film tax credits and where it stands right now.
I don't even, my brain is fried. I think that, he's got his handy dandy list, right? You know what? One of the things I'm watching is there's all of the vetoes and where we sort of land with that. He said, I believe 30 vetoes right now, unless it's changed since then. So I think we're all kind of watching to see whether or not Lombardo tops Gibbons in terms of the number of vetoes. And he said his vetoes really seem to have been really random this year. Not this is the only year, but I'm curious about the strategy and sort of what ends up. Like, he signed bills that I was sure he was going to veto, and then he's vetoed bills that I thought were so innocuous that, like, why wouldn't he just sort of let it become? So I think there's still a lot of surprises we can see in the bills that we're watching. In the same vein of like film credits and the stadium, I've been following a lot of our tax abatement policies and stuff. There's been a bunch of bills related to GoEd as an organization. There was one bill that would have required tax abated companies to offer paid family medical leave, which I thought it was not a huge ask, even though GoEd and sort of the chambers and business people were like, no, Lombardo has vetoed that. And I think there's other bills that people were trying to sort of make changes incrementally. And I'm curious to see where all of those land.
Speaking of vetoes, he just vetoed Assembly Bill 250, which would have made prescription drugs match the federal costs and bring the cost of those prescription drugs down. It was Assemblywoman Venetia Constantine's bill, a super important bill to us, one that we were personally watching. And so your reactions to that, because I was actually very, very excited about that bill for Nevadans who are experiencing high drug costs. What are your reactions to that?
Yeah, I mean, it took a lot on the federal level
Yeah.
to get some sort of negotiation for even just a few of the drugs that are offered under Medicare, and to use Medicare's purchasing power to lower those costs. And there really is no reason why you wouldn't do it. Insurance companies do that thing every day in negotiating for the prices of their drugs. Why should the federal government, with a commensurately much larger purchasing power, and the state government not be able to do that? And that was a bill that would have helped a lot of people. There are some drugs, especially newer drugs that are just out, that are incredibly expensive and that people simply can't afford. It would help them. It would help them with the diseases that they're facing, but they just can't afford it. And so that was a bill I was watching. I wouldn't say I was surprised by that video. I kind of saw that one come.
Well, and it seems like, somebody's asking in the chat about a strategy. One of the things that I've noticed is there's a lot of him wanting to look pro-business right now. And so some of that is in that theme. If it's some of the social justice stuff, maybe not as much, because he did sign the abortion bill, SB 131. He also signed the transgender healthcare bill for incarcerated people, which was SB 153. Those bills we really cared about. But there was another prescription drugs that was Assemblyman Huey Wynn's bill, where it would have made the drug labels translated in multiple languages. He also vetoed that. And so if any strategy, maybe there's a pro-business angle here that he's not trying to want to blast businesses, but at the same time, he also vetoed all three of our gun bills. So who knows? I don't know.
Well, it helps gun businesses.
Yeah, there you go. Any other strategies you're seeing, or maybe themes you're seeing with the governor right now in terms of the vetoes?
I think he definitely, is of the opinion that the legislature has, refused to work with him, and I think he is sending that message through these vetoes, showing that he's not afraid to use his veto power to reject bills. Even some good bills. Now there are some veto messages that were questionable. I think the veto of the original Appropriations Act he was reaching in that because he realized I am going to have to sign some version of this law after a compromise, so I shouldn't go out too far on this limb and say things about it that are going to make it harder for me to sign what essentially is going to be a very similar bill. Well, it is not only very similar, the one they just passed is exactly the same. So so if he signs it, then obviously the objections raised in the first veto are not really his objections, but they were just fig leaves that he was using to wrest further concessions from the Democrats on other issues, which it looks like he's got.
So I have another question in the chat from Guadalupe. She's asking about an immigration bill in Nevada. Obviously, immigration is a federal issue and can only really be dealt with at the federal level. But April, there are a couple really great bills this session, the HOPE Act being one of them, which we saw move out of the Senate today, finally. And I think that's going to probably be one of those endgame bills that we're watching. Talk to us about why that's so important for, pregnant people, children, and their health care, because we've been watching that one really closely as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think your audience probably knows how important healthcare is. I think, you know what I mean? And if you, I guess I have to say that, this is how Nevada does its healthcare policy, is very incremental. And we've seen even in that bill, it sort of gets scaled down to include things to whatever can get past the government.
But this is specifically for undocumented people.
For undocumented people, but not all of them, I think. Right? There's certain ones that's pregnant and children. Is that where it's at now? So it is important. I think it sends a message that we're willing to invest in healthcare, and really, it also saves money in the long run because we're still picking up the costs of all those things elsewhere. When uninsured people show up at hospitals, we still have to treat them and all of that. So there's a financial argument there, as weighted as it is. But I don't know what there is to say. It'll be curious. It's definitely clear that with all of the movement and changes that have been made to that bill, that's part of the sort of end game and in those discussions.
There was another bill actually signed into law by the governor to protect undocumented people who have driver's authorization cards. It was Assembly Bill, I forget the number, but it was Assemblyman Max Carter's bill. I think it was 407, Assembly Bill 407, to protect their data so that it's not given over to ICE and things like that. That was another one that surprised me that the governor signed. Talk to us about some of the immigrant work that has gone into this session, because there were some great immigrant bills that were worked on this session.
Yeah. I don't know that I have followed that as closely as I mean, they've been in the building and they've been talking and they've been sending, from the press, they've been sending a lot of emails and doing clearly a lot of lobbying and a lot of grassroots efforts behind that. Unfortunately, I haven't covered a lot of those bills specifically.
I think that is part and parcel of his signing of SB 131, the abortion bill, because there are provisions in existing law that say that the DMV cannot cooperate for the purposes of immigration enforcement by turning over that information. So it reaffirmed existing law, just like SB 131 reaffirmed the existing policies that were in place thanks to Governor Sisolak's executive order. So he really isn't going too far out on a limb with those things. And in some sense, it actually expands, his bipartisan thread. He's able now to say, I signed that bill because I promised I'd sign it after I said I'd repeal it. So he ended up in the right place, I think.
There's a couple of bills, Steve, that we had talked about earlier, the gun bills that we're waiting on either for special action in the Senate or on the Senate or Secretary's desk in the Assembly. Obviously, the time limit for those overrides have passed. Explain to the viewers why those didn't get the overrides they needed and how a veto override works, because I think a lot of people think it just has to happen in one chamber, but it actually has to happen in both, and it has to be the supermajority. Yeah,
it has to be 2/3 of both chambers. You could easily get that in the Assembly, no problem at all. You can't get that in the Senate unless a Republican breaks ranks. And this Republican Senate caucus has shown a credible loyalty to the governor. They voted against some education bills that he later signed with them standing behind him. So they took the bullet for him to be able to sign some of these bills, even though the Republican caucus had opposed it. I just don't think that they were going to break ranks, especially on bills like those gun bills. And so you saw that the Senate realized that too, and they didn't even bring them up for potential override votes.
So the other bill he just vetoed was death with dignity, something that we both all been watching. April, you gasped when that
I was watching.
happened.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah, talk to us about what that bill did and why that bill was so important.
That bill would have legalized the prescription of life-ending medications for people who have been diagnosed by two separate doctors to be terminally ill and have less than 6 months to live. It's sort of a national push across the country. And Governor Lombardo is now the only governor in the country ever, I guess, to have vetoed it. It's when legislatures pass such legislation, it usually gets through. It's notable that it did pass not on supermajority in either. There were some Democrats that sided with Republicans and voted against it, but it's still kind of shocking that he didn't do that. I think people were really hoping that it would, because of the precedent that no governor has ever overridden it. So,
yeah, that's extremely disappointing for us. That was one of the major bills also we worked on. So that's due today. AB 250, which was prescription drugs, and death with dignity, both vetoed by the governor just moments ago. So that is very frustrating. Death with dignity was SB 239. It was Edgar Flores's bill. So that's extremely disappointing. And I am once again disappointed in the governor. Steve, if a special session happens, talk to us about what we've seen in previous sessions. I think there's a little bit of a theme that goes there. We've seen it in various sessions, but, we keep saying that we feel like this is 2007 all over again. And we've got Jim Gibbons across the road. How do you feel about that?
Well, he's not quite up to the Gibbons level yet.
We'll get there.
48. I would probably agree with you. He probably will get there. Typically, what happens is lawmakers don't finish their work on time during the regular session. So a very brief, maybe 1 or 2 day special session is called immediately after the session, perhaps with a 1 day to intervene. It's usually right afterwards. There's a small list of bills. They have those bills to consider and finish, and then they gavel out and go home. It doesn't last very long. However, there have been examples with longer special sessions, like in 2003, which is the nightmare scenario, in which there were two special sessions. One lasted 9 days. One lasted 28 days. I'm sorry, the first one lasted 10 days. Second one lasted 28 days. So it's really up to the dynamics of what's going on. I'm not seeing the 2003 dynamics, so I don't think that's going to happen. I think if it does happen, it'll be a 1 or 2 day special session very quickly after the current.
All right. So April, our Knights are playing right now. Go Knights, go. So we want to end a little early. Plus, there's tons of conference committees happening still behind us, and we're going to be going all night. So watch our Facebook, watch our Twitter. We're going to have live updates for you all night long. And then we're going to have our regular out in front on Thursday, unless there's a special session. And then we might break in with additional news. So you might see these two again. April, talk to us about your predictions for tonight and your predictions for a potential special session coming up.
You know what? I'm going to manifest that we, they are going to pass the budget, both of the remaining budget bills, and then they are going to pass the A's stadium bill at 11:59 p.m. And then we will go home and it will all be done, and film tax credits will be bumped down further along. That's my prediction.
I think that's very, very, very
incredibly specific.
Don't hold me to that.
Specific and very positive.
You know,
and that is not where you and I are. Go ahead.
No, I would. I wish that it were true. I thought that was going to be true early in the week, but I think they're just.
But Steve's spirit is as broken as mine now.
Yeah, just the incredible volume of bills that are left to do is probably going to make it impossible for them to finish all that work. And then it switches to a special session. Now, some people say, well, the governor has all the power in the special session. He really does. He can call the tune, but the Democrats can decide not to dance. He can put items on the agenda, and they can take up and vote down those items. Again, the only constitutional thing that needs to happen really is the budget, and that has to happen by July 1st.
So we're getting a couple questions in the chat about, do you think this session is successful? I mean, considering that we have a split government, a divided government controlled by both Democrats and Republicans, we have the Democrats control the Assembly and the Senate, Republicans control the governor's office. We have to do all of this. We are constitutionally mandated to do all of this and have a balanced budget in 120 days. It seems like it's dysfunctional, but it doesn't feel like it is sometimes, because we've been here before, we've seen this. But for folks at home watching, this might seem dysfunctional and this might seem like a waste of time. How do y'all feel about that? And how do you feel this session went in the grand scheme of life?
I was asked last night by an elected official who is serving his first term here in Carson City if the process was always as disorganized and chaotic as it is. And I told this person, yes, it is. That's exactly, you're seeing the situation is absolutely normal. And the process is chaotic and disjointed and oftentimes rushed because of the 120 days. And so, yeah, it's absolutely normal. Dysfunctional, I would say if it is dysfunctional, it's systemically dysfunctional, designed to be dysfunctional. And designed to kind of vet all these things, but the vetting really, with the limits on public testimony, the difficulties sometimes, especially at the end with the behind the bar meetings, with conference committees chaotically called and rescheduled and all that, it's very difficult for a regular person or even somebody who's been up for many, many years to follow.
Yeah, last night I was telling my staff, last night felt like Sine Die. It feels like it again today. Mm-hmm. Every session is different. Every session ebbs and flows different, but this one was a unique one. I'll say that. April, how do you feel about this session? Success, failure, and what do you think about the process?
I think Steve said it really best. It is systemic dysfunction. I don't know that it's been more dysfunctional than any other session. And In a certain sense, and I'm thinking of a special session that we've had recently under a Democratic governor and a Democratic thing that is dysfunctional as this may seem. The alternative, I mean, is that it's bad either way, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Is that like when Democrats had the full control, they could do whatever they wanted, and everything was in out of sight, and they did sort of everything out of that. So with this current makeup where it's divided, at least from a reporting perspective, we get more information than we did at least than in the past, because there is more dissent and they do have to compromise and find things. So, I mean, you know, depending on whether or not you think that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to individuals, but it's just the way it is. That's how the sausage is made here. You know what I mean? So
yes. And
we'll see. We've still got several hours to screw it all up.
That's right. And you hope the sausage is always good when it comes out. It doesn't always taste good, but you never know. You know, it's 50-50 at this point.
Yeah.
All right. The Senate just went back in. We'll put the link in the chat for folks at home so you can follow along on Nellis. Any final thoughts as we adjourn for today, this Sine Die edition? Also, Steve, explain what Sine Die means. In case people keep hearing us say that, but maybe they don't know at home what that actually means.
There are Latin words that means without a date. So even though we know the date of the convening of the next legislature, the first Monday of February of 2025, the adjourning Sine Die is adjourning a session without a date for reconvening for the next session. So that's what it means, and that's just a shorthand that everybody.
And what is the proper pronunciation? Because we've Americanized it, but the Latin pronunciation, because it's a Latin word.
Yeah, I'm not being a Latin American. I say Sine Die. But
that's how everyone says it, though.
It's not even technically.
You know what? Probably Maria should tell us.
That's right.
She's fluent in Romance language, and so she could probably tell us.
Maria, am I right? Is that close? Okay, I'm right. Sine Die. Yeah. I thought I knew that as, one of the creators of the Romance language.
I think, Annette, you should try to bring that pronunciation into common usage.
Yeah, they can barely pronounce Sine Die, so why would we do that? Yeah. Okay, friends, we will be back out in front on Thursday at 5. If we go into a special, we'll have additional episodes of this, but just want to tell you, go Knights go. We will be on Facebook and Twitter all night tonight, giving you updates. And I want to thank Steve and April for joining us. Thank you both.
Yeah.
Happy Sine Die, maybe for the first time.
Yeah.
There'll probably be another.
All right. Nice. We're going to get in 4. That's the other prediction.
That's right, April. Positivity. Knock on wood.
Specials.
Knock on wood. Knock on wood.
And sweep them.
All right. That's right.
Oh, there's your prediction.
All right. April and I got to go yell about the Golden Knights so he can watch. Have fun, everyone. Watch the Golden Knights tonight and watch our Facebook and Twitter because we'll have live updates. We'll see you Thursday or sooner if there's a special session. Thanks, everyone.